Liberal journalist MOCKS, Jack Nicholson in public. His stunning response leaves everyone silent. Watch the undercover story. The shocking twist teaches you a lesson about respect. Like, subscribe, and comment what you think about this story. Live broadcast. A famous host known for her relentless takedowns, and a legendary actor walking onto the stage, radiating a calm so unsettling it felt like silence before a storm. No one could have predicted that behind the simple jacket and composed smile was a force waiting to be unleashed. Jack Nicholson, a man who once commanded all of Hollywood, now stood as the prime target of one of television's sharpest tongues. But just a few sarcastic questions in, the entire studio watched in stunned silence as Jack delivered a counter, not with shouting, not with insults, but with the kind of poised truth that could silence 1,000 voices. What began as a one-sided interrogation turned into a masterclass in composure, integrity, and the quiet power of restraint. Don't blink, because what you're about to witness will change the way you see respect, and how one person can make the world stop and listen with nothing but the truth. This morning, social media is ablaze with talk of the electrifying exchange between legendary actor Jack Nicholson and journalist Fiona Carrington on a live taping of the late-night Spotlight talk show. What was expected to be just another celebrity interview has turned into the epicenter of a much deeper cultural reckoning. Fiona, known for her sharp wit and unapologetic opinions, thought she was walking into a routine takedown, a moment to dismantle a man who symbolized old values and conservative masculinity. And Jack. He simply listened, calm as ever, like a man who's seen it all. From the opening jabs, politics, age, and the old-school archetypes of masculinity, Fiona believed she was in control, steering the interview toward another headline-worthy dismantling. But what no one expected was that Jack would respond to each dig with composed reflections, personal anecdotes, and razor-sharp insights that left not just the audience stunned, but Fiona herself speechless. What began as an ambush became a masterclass in poise and presence. The man under the spotlight didn't crumble. He illuminated. This is the story of an unexpected showdown, one that redefined what it means to be powerful in a noisy world. A reminder that real dignity doesn't need to shout to be heard. Take a deep breath and put your hand over your heart. Because what you're about to witness is one of those rare televised moments the world won't soon forget. The studio lights of late-night Spotlight shimmered like a dreamscape, illuminating the sleek black floor of a packed auditorium. This was Fiona Carrington's kingdom, a shrine to modern media intellect, ruled by a woman whose smirk could slice through policy, patriarchy, or pretense. In Fiona's world, guests weren't just interviewed, they were dissected. And tonight, she had chosen a relic. Backstage, producers buzzed like bees. A young assistant clutched a briefing folder and grinned. Who's more iconic than Jack Nicholson? If we want a legendary episode, he's it. Fiona sipped her black coffee, raised a brow, and quipped, "The conservative cowboy grandpa? Oh, this'll be fun." The room laughed. To them, Jack was the embodiment of the past. Masculine, opinionated, closed off. But to Fiona, he was a case study, ready for deconstruction in front of a live, young, digital-savvy audience. For 3 nights, Fiona devoured old films, combed through archives, and scripted every line of questioning with surgical precision. Nothing was left to chance. Not even a line about Jack's infamous empty chair speech. "The internet's gonna eat this up," she whispered, circling the segment in red ink. Meanwhile, in the quiet coastal town of Carmel, Jack Nicholson was having a late breakfast. His porcelain mug caught a soft beam of light filtering through the trees. Time had carved lines into his face, but his eyes still burned with clarity. His young assistant, also named Jack, read the invitation with unease. "You sure about this? Fiona Carrington won't go easy. She'll take shots at everything, from your politics to your crow's feet." Jack chuckled, calm as the tide. "Let her. My job isn't to fight, it's to show up." While the late-night spotlight crew scrambled to perfect their lighting grids, Jack spent his days woodworking, reading, tending to the garden. No rehearsed answers, no defense plan. For him, truth wasn't something you memorize. It's something you embody. On the day of taping, Jack arrived without fanfare. No entourage, no flash. Just a charcoal blazer, well-worn jeans, and a demeanor that suggested he wasn't here to impress, just to be present. His assistant fidgeted with his collar. "Last time I saw you on a lit stage like this, it was the Oscars." Jack smiled. Big difference. At the Oscars, they clap for the spotlight. Here they laugh at their own assumptions. In the wings, Fiona applied a final touch of crimson lipstick. Her team hovered close, one whispering, "Don't let him control the tone." Cut the silences. Keep it snappy. Fiona nodded, stepping into the blaze of applause, LED signs flashing her name. She took center stage, her voice slicing through the air like a freshly whetted blade. "Tonight, we welcome a legend. From an era when women washed dishes, men shot guns, and politics were decided by the color of your cowboy hat." The audience roared. Backstage, Jack sipped his water, glanced at his assistant, and said softly, "Well, the oven's preheated. Guess they're ready to roast me." On stage, Fiona launched into her signature monologue. Jabs at Jack's past roles, political quotes, and old interviews. The crowd was electric. Everything was going according to plan. What Fiona didn't know was that Jack wasn't playing by her rules, and that soon, the audience would no longer be laughing at him, but with him. And eventually, for him. As Jack Nicholson stepped onto the stage, the lights shifted hue, and the room seemed to hold its breath for a fleeting moment. The applause was mixed, curious, skeptical, even a few mocking whistles, as he made his way to the chair across from Fiona Carrington. Fiona extended her hand, that signature half-smile dancing on her lips. "Welcome to the 21st century, cowboy." Jack shook her hand, gave a small nod to the audience, and took his seat, his eyes never leaving the host. He didn't need to perform. His presence alone altered the room's temperature. "You've spent over 6 decades in the entertainment industry," Fiona began, her tone light as air. "Ever wonder if it's time to pass the torch to the next generation?" Laughter rippled through the audience. Jack nodded slowly. "All the time. Especially when I see young talent that inspires me. But I also believe the work isn't about age. It's about whether your heart still wants to tell stories." A few claps scattered through the crowd. The mood hadn't shifted entirely, but the directness of his response gave people pause. Fiona pressed on, her gaze sharpening. "The world's changed. Your early films, undeniably iconic, have also been criticized for lacking diversity and progressiveness. Ever feel like you represent an era best left behind?" Laughter again. A few cheers. Jack paused for a beat, then responded in his calm, gravelly voice. "Film reflects the time it was made in. Some things don't hold up. But instead of erasing the past, I think we should learn from it, not destroy it." This time, no laughter, just a few murmurs. Perhaps someone felt seen. Sensing the shift, Fiona pivoted. "To be fair, you've also been known for some outdated political stances. Doesn't it bother you to risk alienating audiences?" Jack smiled. "Truth doesn't need to be popular. It just needs to be honest." The room quieted. The smirks on a few faces began to fade into thoughtful expressions. Fiona leaned in, undeterred. Some say you're clinging to the past, that you're stuck conservative, out of touch. Jack shrugged. People can call me whatever they like. I'm not clinging, I'm honoring. The past, if seen clearly, is the foundation for moving forward, Fiona faltered. For the first time in the taping, she didn't have a comeback ready. The crowd sat still. Heads were beginning to nod. A quiet, collective shift from curiosity to respect. Fiona forced a smile. So you're saying we shouldn't move too fast, not just tear it all down? Jack tilted his head slightly, his eyes more serious now. I'm not against change, but building something new doesn't mean burning the roots. A tree can't grow tall if its roots are destroyed. Silence. Not the awkward kind. Something deeper. The audience, once primed for a roast, realized they were witnessing something else entirely. A conversation that made them rethink their own assumptions. Fiona licked her lips, her tone softer now. You've made mistakes, I'm sure. Ever feel tired of always standing alone? Jack looked directly at her, his eyes honest and clear. Of course. I've been lonely. I've doubted myself. But I've also learned this. You don't always have to win. Sometimes just standing still in the storm is brave enough. For a moment, the studio, packed with hundreds, fell silent like a chapel. Cameras panned slowly across faces, puzzled, moved, reflective. Fiona leaned back, silent for a few seconds, then finally said, You know, I thought this would be a sharp debate, a duel of ideas, but you've made me listen. Jack nodded with a gentle smile. That's where all good things begin, listening. The late-night spotlight studio was no longer a stage for satire. It had become a frontier between two generations, two worldviews, but no longer a battlefield. It was now a space for dialogue. And just when the air had begun to soften, Fiona Carrington decided to push the edge one last time. She straightened in her seat, slid her cue cards aside, but kept that mischievous smirk at the corner of her lips. Jack, be honest. Those old cowboy films you starred in, where men solve problems with guns and dominance, have you ever considered that maybe you helped shape toxic ideas of masculinity? The audience laughed. That familiar laughter on her show. The laughter of cultural reckoning, of a generation peeling back old icons with fresh critique. Some whistles, some approving claps. Jack didn't flinch. He nodded slightly as if weighing her words. I understand why people say that, but let's remember the context. Back then, a man with a gun wasn't just about violence. It symbolized survival, protection, in a world that wasn't yet fair. Fiona crossed her arms, lips pressed, but that symbol still lingers. In politics, in everyday life, and not always for good. Jack smiled gently. I don't deny that, but the fault isn't in the symbol. It's in how we use it today. A hammer can build a house, or tear it down. But we don't blame the hammer, do we? A soft, "Oh," came from the audience. A young man in the front row nodded quietly. Fiona raised an eyebrow. Fair point, she said. But we also have to admit, your generation's silence about past injustices has been part of the problem too. Jack nodded. No defensiveness. You're right. We were silent too long. Sometimes out of ignorance, sometimes out of fear. But I'm sitting here tonight so I won't be silent anymore. And if I need to apologize for the times I didn't speak up, I'll do it now. I'm sorry. The room froze. Fiona hadn't expected that, and the audience certainly hadn't, Jack continued, voice softer now, as if speaking to himself. I have a granddaughter. She once asked me why women in those old westerns were always in the kitchen or kidnapped. I didn't know what to say. But since then, I've paid attention to every strong woman on screen, and I'm glad the world is doing better. Applause. Not thunderous, but deep, quiet. The kind of applause you give to someone who just said something true. For the first time that night, Fiona let the silence stretch. "You've changed more than I expected," she said quietly. Jack tilted his head. "Or maybe you just started listening." The crowd laughed. Not mockingly, but with a warmth that echoed something they themselves had just realized. Fiona chuckled softly. She nodded. "Touché." But then, she leaned in again. This time with a gentler strike, one last test of Jack's stance. "So what do you think about being canceled? Seems like every time someone famous says the wrong thing, especially someone older, they're immediately written off. Were you ever afraid of that?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked off into the distance, as if searching through the quietest part of his thoughts. "Of course I was," he said. "I'm human, but I've learned this. If I say something from the heart and it hurts someone, I'll listen. I'll make it right if I can, but I will never live in fear of being disliked." Fiona blinked. Jack continued. "I've spent my life trying to do what I believe is right, and if someone doesn't like me for that, I can live with it. But I won't lose myself just to please everyone." Applause again. Louder this time. Firmer, genuine. "Atatesamis." Fiona leaned slightly toward him, and for the first time that night, her eyes held pure respect. "You know, I think the audience came here expecting me to take you down, but it turns out I'm the one who just learned something." Jack gave her a subtle smile. "Sometimes learning is the biggest victory." Fiona Carrington leaned slightly back, the leather chair beneath her letting out a faint creak. Every sharp-edged question she had prepared now seemed misplaced. Jack Nicholson had weathered every volley with a weapon far more dangerous than rebuttal. Composure. Yet within, Fiona still burned a small flame. Not the fire to destroy a guest, but the fire of a host who'd built her career on always steering the conversation. She couldn't let this episode slip by as if she had lost control. She leaned forward again, that icy smile returning to her lips. "Jack, here's a question I think many out there are waiting to hear you answer." The room fell silent. She paused just long enough for the air to tighten. "You once said you don't believe in the woke media, that too many shows today are just trying to brainwash their audiences. Don't you think that's a bit extreme?" A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded, some frowned. They were entering dangerous territory. Jack didn't blink. He calmly adjusted his mic closer. "I think there's a difference between encouraging people to think and telling them what to think." Fiona's smile held, but her eyes lost some of their ease. "So you're saying shows like mine push a narrative?" Jack raised an eyebrow, but didn't rush to strike back. "I think a host has every right to present their views, but the audience, they get to decide what they believe. The real issue isn't the question being asked, it's how some twist the answer." A scattered applause broke out. Some people in the audience had begun to look at Fiona differently, watching her reaction more closely than Jack's response. Fiona leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "What about young audiences? They're more impressionable. They don't always have the tools to separate opinion from persuasion. Don't people like you, with huge influence, have a greater responsibility for what you say?" Jack nodded. "I agree. Influence always comes with responsibility. But that doesn't mean I have to say what everyone wants to hear. If I lived just to please every opinion, I would have stopped being myself a long time ago." Fiona stayed silent. Jack continued. "Young people come up to me after talks. They don't ask me what to believe. They ask how to know what they believe is right. And I tell them one thing: read more things you disagree with. Listen harder to what makes you uncomfortable. That friction, that's where growth lives." The energy in the room shifted, like air being pulled inward. A young man near the front whispered, "That's deep." Fiona couldn't deny it, but she wasn't ready to surrender. "So, do you think the media is being manipulated?" Jack looked straight at her, voice low but resolute. "I think the media isn't controlled by some grand puppet master. It's controlled by fear. Fear of losing viewers, by the race for ratings, and sometimes by the pride of people like you or me who believe we're always right." The room froze. Fiona stiffened. No one had ever spoken to her like that, especially not live on national television. The audience didn't laugh, didn't applaud. They simply sat in silence, a silence that felt thick. Oh, sigh. Head heavy, like everyone had just witnessed a truth no one usually dares to name. Fiona swallowed hard, her eyes flickering. She spun the pen in her fingers, trying to steady her breath. "So, if you could choose again, who would you want to be in today's world?" Jack tilted his head, then smiled. "Me, but the version of me who listens more." It was so simple, it hurt. And it landed squarely in the one place Fiona had never thought to question. Herself. She, the woman who always demanded guests re-examine themselves, had never once asked the same of her own reflection. A round of applause rose, not for a victory, but for something that had cracked open, gently, but unmistakably. The silence that followed Jack Nicholson's final words wasn't the awkward hush that trails a sharp remark. It was the echo of something unspoken, a presence lingering in the air, and the audience felt it too. That behind his stillness, there was more to the story, something left unsaid. Fiona, ever attuned to the emotional current in the studio, sensed the moment. She set aside the scripted questions, looked up, and spoke slowly. "Jack, I feel like there's something else you want to share. Not about politics, not about film, but about you." Jack sat still for a moment. His eyes, no longer sharp with debate, softened, like dusk settling over a quiet lake. "You're right," he said, voice low and steady, almost as if reminding himself. "There's one story I've never told on television." The audience stirred. The cameras instinctively zoomed in, ever so slightly. "I once lost everything," Jack began. "Not fame. Myself." Fiona went still. She knew what was coming. Wasn't a glossy anecdote, but a raw, painful truth. "In 1983, at the peak of my career, I walked away from a film that later won an Oscar. All because I blew up at the director during auditions," he said, his eyes fixed on a space no one else could see. "People only saw me collecting trophies, smiling for cameras, but they didn't see the night I sat alone in my apartment, staring at a white wall, asking, 'Who am I if I'm not making movies?'" Fiona said nothing. Her hand gently tightened around her notepad, but she didn't interrupt. Jack continued. "A few years later, my mother passed away. I went back to my childhood home in New Jersey to sort through her things. While going through old mail, I found a letter from a young filmmaker begging me to read his first script. I had never opened it." He paused. "That script became Dead Poets Society." The entire room froze. "I had a chance to help a young voice be heard, and I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I was too busy to care." He paused again. His gaze swept across the room. No one laughed. No one whispered. Many eyes were red with tears. "I'm not telling you this to sound noble or regretful," he said. "I'm telling you because we all turn away from the good we could have done. What matters is whether we ever turn back to listen, or if we just keep walking. From the audience, a young woman wiped her cheeks. The camera caught the moment. Honest, unfiltered. Fiona leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "So, what made you come back to conversations like this? To the public?" Jack looked at her. "Because I realized I still have something to say. Not to change the world, but to share the mistakes. So maybe someone, just one person, won't repeat them." The studio felt frozen in time. The host, the audience, the crew behind the scenes all knew they were witnessing something far greater than a talk show. They were seeing a legend strip away the armor of history to reveal the most human part of himself. Fiona sat in silence, her eyes full of quiet reverence. Jack, thank you, truly." Jack nodded gently. "Thank you for not interrupting." After the recording ended, the studio didn't erupt in the usual waves of laughter and applause. Instead, a profound silence settled. One not of awkwardness, but of awakening. It felt as though everyone had left carrying a thought too deep to name. Fiona Carrington remained seated long after the audience had filed out. Her script lay still on the desk, and the sharp-edged questions, once her trademark weapons, now felt like nothing more than scraps of paper. She leaned her elbows on the table, eyes locked on the teleprompter's fading glow. Only one question echoed in her mind. When did I stop listening? A door backstage creaked open. Veronica, Fiona's longtime assistant and closest friend, stepped in, holding a tablet with the latest viewership stats. "Fiona," she said, her voice softer than usual, "I know this might not matter right now, but the numbers are skyrocketing, and the audience feedback is different." Fiona didn't look up. "Different how?" Veronica hesitated, then handed her the screen. She saw comments flooding every platform. "This is the first time I watched Fiona Carrington without anger, just sincerity. Jack wasn't trying to win. He just made me want to listen more. I cried when he spoke about the forgotten letter. I once ignored someone just like that." Fiona set the tablet down, unclipped her mic, and exhaled slowly. Jack never tried to take the stage, but somehow, he made me step off it. Veronica sat beside her without a word. Sometimes, a best friend's role is just to sit quietly beside you when you break. The next morning, social media was ablaze with clips from the interview. The moment Jack spoke about the forgotten letter spread like wildfire, not because it was dramatic, but because it was unfiltered truth. In a high school classroom in Ohio, a teacher played that scene as a lesson on honesty. At a tiny Brooklyn cafe, the conversation wasn't about politics. It was about the value of silence Jack had spoken of. Fiona sat in her apartment. No makeup, no cameras. Just her and a laptop screen. She opened her writing software and typed the headline, "A lesson from a man who didn't need to win to be heard." Meanwhile, at Jack's ranch in Carmel, there were no ringing phones, no reporters at the gate, just trees swaying gently in the wind. Jack was repairing the front fence when his assistant, also named Jack, came jogging out of the house, laptop in hand. "You should see this," he said. Fiona just published an open letter. Jack took the laptop. The screen lit up with Fiona's words. "I used to think I was great at staying in control, but Jack helped me realize that sometimes what we need most isn't to speak sharply, but to stay silent and listen. He didn't come to win, he came to share, and for the first time in years, I truly learned how to listen." Jack smiled. She got it. The following week, back at the studio, Fiona walked in with a different kind of energy. Not the familiar sharp edge, but the quiet depth of someone who had gone through a conversation that changed how they saw the world. She told her team, "Today's show won't be about breaking guests down. To das. Today Today, we listen. The crew exchanged surprised looks, then nodded. As filming began, Fiona turned toward the camera and opened with a line that silenced the entire studio. Last week, I thought I brought Jack Nicholson here to challenge him, but it turns out I was the one being challenged. And thanks to him, I learned the most important lesson in 10 years of broadcasting. Listening isn't about waiting for your turn to speak. Listening is about trying to understand. The audience applauded, not with the raucous cheers of entertainment, but with a slow, thoughtful rhythm that matched the weight of the message. At the ranch, Jack watched the episode on a small screen in his kitchen. He smiled softly, then turned back to add another log to the fire. No need for more spotlight. No need for another TV appearance. He just needed to know someone truly heard what he said. 1 week after the historic broadcast, the late-night spotlight studio lights still shone as usual. But the audience no longer came to laugh at arrogance or revel in sharp-tongued takedowns. They came for something else, something Jack Nicholson had left behind. And no one was surprised when Fiona Carrington opened that night's show, not with thanks to the crew, not to the audience, but to the man who reminded me why I started this career. At a small cafe in Oregon, a group of college students huddled around an iPad, rewatching the interview. They weren't dissecting trending quotes or debating the most viral moment. They were discussing how Jack spoke about conviction, about turning down a role simply because it didn't align with his values. One student said, "It's the first time I've seen a public figure who didn't try to be liked, and yet earned everyone's respect." At a high school in Texas, a history teacher played the clip where Jack said, "You can't write a new chapter if you keep tearing out the old pages." The room went still. A student raised their hand. "Miss, do people ever get rejected by the world just for staying true to what they believe in?" The teacher paused, then answered softly, "Yes, but they don't live to be accepted. They live to do what's right. And sometimes, just one person like that is enough to change the way the world sees decency." Back at the peaceful Carmel Ranch, Jack Nicholson was watering his garden when a handwritten letter arrived from Fiona Carrington herself. The handwriting was careful, the message short. "I don't know if I've completely changed, but I've started to listen, and that's because of you. Thank you for not arguing, but still making us think." Jack folded the letter and slipped it into his shirt pocket, letting out a faint smile. Not a smile of victory, but the smile of a man who knows the message landed where it mattered. A few months later, a young journalist visited Jack for a feature called "The Conversations That Silenced America." When asked, "Do you think you won that interview?" Jack raised an eyebrow, sipped his coffee, and replied, It didn't come to win. I came to remind people the truth doesn't need to shout." On the final night of the broadcast season, Fiona stood center stage beneath gentler lighting. No more dagger-like glances. No more biting punchlines. She closed the show with a quote. Jack's words, "Don't let the noise drown out your inner voice. Stand still and hear what really matters." The audience rose, not with cheering, not with fanfare. They applauded quietly, the kind of applause reserved for awakening. Jack Nicholson, a man who needed no defense, no spotlight, had changed how people viewed conversation through nothing but his stillness. And while the world kept shouting for a place to stand, he simply chose to sit and speak the truth with a voice that was calm, grounded, and didn't need to win. If you believe kindness and truth still carry quiet strength in a loud world, like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories that move you, and leave a comment. How has listening changed me? We want to hear your voice, because in a world where everyone wants to speak, having the courage to listen is power.